What if I told you the average Australian born today will likely live well into the 22nd century? Now, that's not science fiction. That's where demographic data is pointing right now, and it has enormous implications for how we work, how we invest, how we retire, and in fact, how we think about money. Most Australians are still planning their finances around a life that ends at 80, 85. But what happens when you live to 100 or beyond? Suddenly, a 20-year retirement becomes a 35-year one. The superannuation balance you thought was enough probably isn't. And the property and wealth strategy you built in your 40s may need a serious rethink. Welcome to this week's episode of Demographics Decoded, the show that unveils the trends shaping our future. Hi, I'm Michael Yardney, and joining me each week is leading demographer Simon Kuestenmacher, and together we dig beneath the data to uncover the trends shaping our economy, our communities, and our future prosperity. And of course, what that means for your business, your investments, and your life. Our aim is to help you make sense of what's coming next so you can make smarter decisions. And today we're going to dive deep into one of the most profound shifts in our lifetime, the longevity revolution, and what it means for your money, your investments, and your future. Welcome, Simon.
Good to be on.
Well, I'm older than you, so maybe, to be blunt, I was always thinking 85, really 90 if I'm lucky. But you're younger, so I guess the health revolutions are going to change. But I recently read that the average Australian can likely live well into the 22nd century, as I said in the introduction. When you look at your demographic data, does that actually stack up? Are we actually driving to this longevity trend?
Yes, it is. So we are getting older. That keeps going on. So we are a rich and
we are all getting older, but are we living longer?
Yeah, that's right. No, we are living longer. We are dying later in life on average. That's very, very true. And that's because when you first think about living longer, it's easy because you solve death at childbirth. And once you solve this, your life expectancy makes this massive boost as a country, just statistically speaking. And then once you solve all those problems, you need to solve issues like cancer. That's the stuff that you die from in old age. You need to solve stuff like dementia. And so we're slowly tackling these issues. So we will also get older, and we'll see the number of 100-year-olds grow faster and faster. The 100-plus cohort is actually the cohort that in all statistical senses grows the fastest. So that's nice. And so then you go, well, is this going to plateau anytime soon? And we don't really have any reason to believe that it does so. We would think it would slow down, because once you have an healthy and aging population, it's even harder to squeeze it up a bit more, to get a bit healthier. That's a problem. But we can make all the arguments that medical advances keep accelerating, better cancer treatment, better cardiovascular interventions, and all of the AI technologies that actually make this even more easy to detect problems, and therefore you push on life expectancy. So I think that's quite thinkable.
I guess Australia is well placed for this too, isn't it? Being a affluent country, a highly educated country, high quality of healthcare, strong living standards compared to some of the unfortunate underdeveloped countries around the world.
Exactly. So if you compare a rich country like Australia to poorer economies, we have a big leg up on them. And then you look at something like the US. They are richer than we are on average, but the wealth is a bit more unevenly distributed, and the healthcare system is more unevenly distributed. So they have rich old people, but the poor people, they're not growing as rich in the US as they are here. So we've actually seen life expectancy numbers in the US decline in recent years, which is a bit of a tragedy for a rich country in particular, that you let something like this happen. So there's really not much excuses that you have. So yeah, I would expect this to go on in Australia. We of course invest in all the right fields. We invest into cancer treatment an awful lot, into cancer research, and these kind of that's the data that is most likely linked with death in old age. So any technology, any research that we throw at it should make us live even longer.
Well, are we emotionally ready for it? Are we socially ready for it, where people living to 100 becomes more common, Simon?
Yeah, probably not. Is the honest answer. So it has quite a few implications. So if you retire at 65, are we emotionally ready to live for 35 years without work?
Yes.
And you say, well, maybe I am. Maybe I have enough hobbies. There is enough football that I need to watch. There's enough beer I need to drink. So I can easily spend my time with something. That's fine. But that then says, well, do we actually have enough money saved up to actually pay you through 35 years of retirement? Does the superannuation system have enough? Does the healthcare system have enough? And that, of course, raises the big question. Well, living long sounds nice, but really I'd rather live shorter if my quality of life isn't sufficient. If I live my old age in poor health, that's probably not very desirable as an outcome.
That makes sense. Now, retirement at 65, that's now seems to be an outdated concept. Already more baby boomers are working longer than that because they need to or they want to. But for decades, Australia has treated 65 as the psychological finishing line for work. I guess that's going to have to change.
It is changing all over the world. We are slowly pushing retirement ages upwards. It's a logical consequence for us living longer, because you just need to ensure that you work for longer so that you save up more money to pay for your ever longer retirement. There's no other choice about this. And the magic number of 65 was, of course, introduced in Australia when life expectancy was below 65, when the average person didn't reach retirement age. And so if now everyone blows past this magic number by decades, you must obviously readjust it. And that, of course, is easier to say to a knowledge worker. Can you be a suburban accountant well into your 70s? Of course, no
Yes.
problem. But can you lay bricks into your 70s? Probably not. So all of a sudden you have differences here on how do we manage different jobs, because we can't just say, well, at 65 you stop being a bricklayer and you become an accountant, something like this. So we must figure out ways of dealing with this, of just if you are mistrusting of the system and you have a physically taxing job, you probably are well advised to put even more money aside than you're legally required through your super savings.
I can see that there's now a bit of an emergence of semi-retirement. In other words, people working 2 or 3 days a week well into their 70s. I guess this has got implications for employers, Simon, because they may need to redesign some of the roles to suit older workers. Of course, that'll help in some industries where we are going to have a shortage of workers unless AI takes over those roles too.
Yeah, and we are already seeing the beginnings of this trend quite often. I think for many baby boomers who are now the current retirees, the hard retirement is not the norm anymore. They slide into retirement. They slowly reduce their working days, their working hours. They take longer breaks in the middle of the year. And so therefore their employers must adjust to that. The employers must actually learn to become more flexible. And we know that this can be very, very good for the workers, because the hard cut of leaving your work life completely behind, of leaving your work persona completely behind, we know that that has negative consequences on your mental health, because you don't know what to do with your time anymore. So that's problematic. So it allows you to get used to the non-working part of your life in a more easy transition. And that's, of course, great for marriages as well, because we know that fresh retirement can actually be a big source of conflict in a relationship. And then you break up a marriage because you think you are not compatible anymore, but it's just the circumstances of your life that just throws a big spanner in the works as well. So I think the sliding into retirement approach might just save your marriage. So that is always a welcome development. So yeah, I'm a fan, and we'll be seeing more of that.
Now, in previous episodes of Demographics Decoded, we've talked about the fact that we've passed peak baby and peak teenagers globally, but the number of 65-year-olds is still rising. Now, before I ask you the question about this, for those of you listening or watching this, if you don't currently subscribe, there's a whole back catalogue of 100 shows that Simon and I have done, and go to your favorite podcast app or YouTube and click follow or subscribe so that the algorithm knows you want to keep getting our information. But go back and have a look at this, because demographics will determine our future, whether you're in business or investing or just an interested party as well. But the fact that we've actually now, as I've said previously discussed, the fact that we've reached a couple of peaks, you look at demographics as part of your business to help your clients. From a demographic perspective, what are the changes going to be? What are the big pressure points if we're going to keep living longer?
Yeah, so for quite a while, we talked about the demographic dividend, where you have this surge of babies, and then there's the baby boom, and then those baby boom babies, they become super productive workers. They pay so much tax into the system. And so you have the demographic dividend. You benefit from this. And then as a system, you eventually retire all of those baby boomers, and you do this around the world in many countries. And then you have the opposite of the demographic dividend. And so you have on the other end, all of a sudden, fewer people entering the workforce and more people leave. And so you have you have more demand on services, on superannuation payouts, on medical services, on aged care services. So that becomes quite difficult. This has implications for the tax system because the dependency ratio, which is the number of workers put in relation to the non-workers, that goes down. So the workers have to support with their tax that they create a larger cohort of people. That can be a source of political conflict, of financial pressure for people, for workers. So that's a difficult issue. We're yet to be seen. It's yet to be seen how the healthcare system will actually, and the aged care system will cope with this strain, with the idea of pushing more people into those services. And that's locked in. So that'll definitely happen. So we have no other choice than to completely reinvent the way we develop or provide aged care. Thank God we have a pension system that doesn't fully rely just on the state. We have the superannuation system. So that was very smart 30 years ago, more than that even now, that we introduced this because financially speaking, we can afford to retire because we have self-funded retirements, because we put a gun to your head and said you have to save for retirement. But we are now benefiting from this in Australia. I, of course, always compare this situation in Australia with my home country of Germany, with France, systems where we don't have a superannuation system, systems that are where the pension systems in Europe will break very soon. And so you just have a worse retirement for retirees in those regions.
Having said that, I'm not sure that superannuation amounts, the people that have got there, even though they've saved all their life, are going to be enough to live, I guess, 30 plus years in retirement. I guess it's also going to change housing demand. The more single people households, more downsizers, more demand for accessible and adaptable housing, and I guess more aged care requirements in accommodation that way too, Simon.
Absolutely. This is a huge shift on the housing market. So first and foremost, people are absolutely free, and so they always should be, to choose what they do in their old age in housing. But so if you secretly thought that a house, a family-sized home, will be entering the market, that just now happens later because the baby boomer dies out of this home at a later stage in life, and you might well die at 100 and then still live in the family-sized home. And so the house didn't enter the market at 70 because you didn't downsize or anything at age 70, but it only re-enters the market 30 years later. So this puts delays on introduction of old stock into the housing supply system there. It also, of course, obviously drives up the demand for property classes that are occupied by elderly or people, like retirement villages or aged care facilities. So the demand for those sectors is going to go up because we predictably know what's happening over the next couple of decades. So great investments in high demand. Definitely they'll be undersupplied because we can't really cope with the order of magnitude of growth. So that's quite nice. Yeah, but of course you want to put yourself into the shoes of somebody who left work and is moving towards 100. What are they going to do? How are they going to prepare for longevity? And I think we see this more with baby boomers who are much more health conscious and active in old age than previous generations. So many more baby boomers go on daily walks, go on Pilates classes, and so forth. And so I think just the number of fit oldies keeps going up and up and up, which is exactly what we want. And we should also get much more aware about how certain things like diet and lifestyle factors impact health outcomes in old age. So that's the stuff of preventative medicine through healthy eating. Yeah, what kind of diet do you need to have in order to minimize your chance of suffering from dementia? All of this stuff we will get much smarter about. I'm very certain, because boomers so far reshaped, reinvented every stage of the life cycle they ever lived through, and they will do the same with old age.
Simon, as you were saying that, I was remembering an image in my mind of when Pam and I visited China, and in the parks in the morning, there was whole gatherings of older people, retired, doing their Tai Chi or whatever their exercises were together. And it was a great social gathering for them, but also they were keeping themselves fit in a group.
Absolutely. So whenever you visit China, you must get up early in the morning and go to the local park. It was my favorite time of the day in China was 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. When you see in the parks people up and about, and they do the best things you can do in old age. you're physically active, and you're being social. That stuff is worth an awful lot. And lots of those mobility exercises that they do are really great. So you don't become a Arnold Schwarzenegger type bodybuilder, but they have all types of exercises where you increase your range of movement or retain your range of movement in old age. That's very, very important. So that's wonderful. That all the power to this. And we should, of course, as a society, facilitate these type of events. We should see, can we establish such cultures? And, we have parks. So
We
we
have
should
lots
push.
of parks, but I haven't seen any groups like that in Australia. And it makes sense also for the social activity so that they don't feel as lonely. They're already at the beginning of the day interacting with people.
Absolutely. So just from any kind of mental health professional would cry tears of joy when they walk through a Chinese park in the morning and they see this. And this is happening all over the nation because this is a national mindset. It's a cultural phenomenon.
Yes.
There are, of course, plenty of Chinese old people who sit at home drunk in the morning or something as well. So who do exactly the things you shouldn't do for your longevity. But overall, it's a mass phenomenon that exists and that is going to be very, very beneficial for the overall population.
Now, Simon, living longer sounds like a gift, but I guess it also means that people are going to need their money to last longer. Can you see this creating financial stress for some Australians?
Yeah, and we see this already when you ask baby boomers or right now. One of the big concerns that they always quote is the fear of running out of money. Because yes, you accrued savings. This is wonderful, and you accrued them just for your old age to actually have a good retirement. The problem, of course, is that you don't know when you die. So you can't really time your spending. You don't know how much your medical maintenance costs will be in old age. So that makes it very difficult. And so the risk is that you don't spend, that you don't actually use your own money to enjoy your own golden years because out of fear. The other risk is that you actually burn through all the money on a couple of cruises and then you're broke at 80. You don't want that either. So it's a fine balancing act. And so far, when we look at spending data from the boomer population, they've mentioned the fear of running out of money, but they're not overly cautious with money. So
Now,
we'll
we've
see.
spoken about the concept of die with zero in a previous show. So if this is an interesting concept for you, if you're a boomer or heading towards retirement and you're wanting to understand how to make your money last longer, how long you should do it, should you give it to the kids as the bank of mum and dad? Again, go back to the back catalogue wherever you're watching this or listening to this and just put in there die with zero. And Simon's got some great thoughts about that. But I think it's also going to be creating a divide, Simon, between those who own property or assets and those who don't. Only 2 days ago, I was speaking with my best friend whose mother is 98 and she still rents a two-bedroom apartment. Fortunately, she's physically well and mentally well, but my friend Chris actually has to financially support her because she can't afford it.
No, and that's of course the financially speaking, the single best indicator to know that you're not suffering from poverty in old age is that you live in your own property. Because then just the property costs that you have in your monthly budget are significantly lower. And so you'd always want to want to retire into your own property. So that your pension, your superannuation payouts, whatever it is, that they actually go towards you and not towards your property. And yeah, so we of course risk that we are retiring an ever greater cohort of people that are renters. And that's problematic.
Yes.
Because first and foremost, well, maybe if their families have to support them, the system itself wouldn't be too worried about this. Then if your friend Chris supports his mom, then the system isn't worried. But if Chris was to drop dead and all of a sudden pension system, rent assistance, something like this has to kick in towards the old lady, then the system, of course, has a cost associated with it. And that's fine for a couple of people. But if this thing gets bigger and bigger, you create financial strain through an aging population. So that it's absolutely crucial for a healthcare and for a financial system, for a country to come to terms financially how we age a population. Because if we don't do this, you just view old people as a cost. What kind of society is that? What kind of view at humanity is that? Where you just view old people as a burden, as a cost as a line of cost in some sort of spreadsheet. That is an awful society to create. We don't want that. But in order to not end up like this, we must understand how many there are. We must carefully and conservatively set up our financial and care systems.
Interestingly, the reason Chris and I were discussing it the other day was because where his mother's living is being demolished and she has to move. Which landlord would give a lease to a 98-year-old lady, no matter how fit she is? So the interesting thing is he's got to go on the lease as well to guarantee that. But I guess
Yeah.
all this shows that we are going to, we've spoken already a little bit about it a minute ago, that we're going to have to provide a different level of housing, more singles, more couples after their children have left home. And yes, many baby boomers are going to want to stay in the family home until they're carried out in that little box. But I guess we are going to need more diversity in our housing, in the sort of
We
dwelling
do.
we provide.
Absolutely. So the number of widows, of course, will increase massively in absolute numbers because life expectancy for women remains higher than it is for men. And so you'll see more and more of those old moms just living alone. And they either live alone in the house because they can't be bothered moving out. It's not an easy thing to move house ever. And it probably isn't if you become a widow in your 80s, in your 90s, at 100. So you don't want that. But of course, we must honestly, because this number of, and 100 is just this magical statistical fun year to think about. But because we have so many more old people in the system, we want to ensure that our dwelling stock is actually appropriate. So that means, how do we build our dwellings with showers that are easy to step in or step out? Yeah, so these are little things that make all the difference. Can you just easily plonk a rail to your toilet? You don't need to have this for the first 60 years that you live in a property, from when you first buy it at 20 or move in at 20, but at some point you want it. And so that's
Yeah.
the kind of stuff. Is our dwelling stock, does it make it easier or harder to age in place?
There's a few more things I want to ask you, but before I do, I want to explain that a team at Metropole who help our clients grow, pass on their wealth through strategic property advice, take these sort of demographic trends into account when we decide where to recommend our clients invest. We're much more than the buyer's agent. We help our clients through putting a strategic plan together and then help them implement it. And I know at the moment, many of you watching this, listening to this, are a bit concerned about all the changes that are happening with the government, with the politics, with tax. If you want to understand what this means to you, I'll leave a link in the show notes. Go to metropole.com.au and have a chat with one of our wealth strategists so we can help you make sense of this ever-changing world. Now, Simon, I know you take all this into account when you advise your clients in your presentations or your consulting work.
Exactly. And so I do just that, tell the demographic story about any kind of topic that we're looking at. And I personally am presenting at more and more events just about the aged care sector, for example, about there's always things like Aging Australia, big organizations that look after just that really understand that you must plan accordingly, that you must lobby for these things accordingly. And so we help bodies like this with our research. And of course, anyone else who is willing to listen.
Well, if anyone's listening to this and interested in having you present to their company, their organization, their institution, I'll leave a link in the show notes where you can get in contact with Simon of the Demographics Group. Now, Simon, as I was thinking about this, I wondered about marriage and family structures. A marriage at 30 could theoretically, I guess, last 70 years. Nowadays, a few of our friends have had 50-year marriages. We also know that marriages don't last as long nowadays. More of us are getting divorced. We're seeing more blended families. Are we going to end up seeing more second and third partnerships? What's going to happen to the family structure?
Absolutely. So the amount of blended families, of more complex setups, that must grow because there is just more time to get divorced. That's just a simple fact. But more importantly, I think many people change their logic about divorce. So maybe in the past, at 65, you thought, I have a couple of years, I'm not getting divorced now, I'm too old for this. But if you now think, I easily got another 20, 30 plus years to live, and this thing isn't working, I might as well change things up now. So I think we'll see this. We'll see plenty of newlyweds in the 70s. That's going to be a niche phenomenon still compared to all the normal marriages in their 30s, but it will increase. We'll see much more of that. And then those blended new families, couple setups, that creates more complexity in the housing market, what they want. There might be more complex intergenerational living arrangements that come out of this as well. Yeah. So That's one element. But also, of course, if we take the issue of divorce as a more serious event in our old age, we should always make sure that we treat our friendships more carefully, because we know that in old age, being married is an absolutely wonderful mental health boost. And so, because loneliness is avoided. And so, if you get divorced and you might be living by yourself, you better have a good social network. And so therefore, just in case you might get divorced, treat your friends well and keep those relationships with your friends in good nick.
Men are more vulnerable to this, though, aren't they? They're not usually as good at women at keeping their social networks up.
No, and especially the current cohort of retirees isn't, because quite often the men were the sole or the prime income earner in a relationship, and so therefore they put a lot of emphasis on strengthening the work persona. They retire at a relatively high stage of their career, so they have a lot of reputation when they retire, and so you leave your work persona behind, and then you realize upon retirement that all of the friends that you have are actually the husbands of your wife's friends, not
Yes,
your own friends. And your colleagues, they kind of fizzle away once your work persona gets dissolved. And so all of a sudden you realize, oh my Lord, the friendships that I had beforehand, I haven't treated them, I haven't maintained them well enough. And then that has very severe poor mental health impacts. And so it's absolutely crucial, especially for the men listening, to keep your friendships alive, to occasionally go out for a drink with your friends or golfing, whatever you prefer. I think it's crucial to maintain those relationships.
I agree with that. Now, Simon, you work with data every day. When you look at the different cohorts moving through Australia's population now, the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, the millennials, is there a particular generation that faces bigger challenges adapting to this longer lifestyle than others?
Yeah, well, so in a sense, right now we would worry about the baby boomers because they are the current retirees. So, and they are a big cohort. So it's the first really, really big cohort that we push into retirement, where we can talk about retirement as a mass phenomenon, and then old age and poor health as a mass phenomenon. Before that, retirees were always a small cohort in relative terms. So we could kind of sort of forget about them. It was easy enough to put this to the back of our minds. Baby boomers force up to look at this. So that's I think very helpful for the up and coming generations, because the baby boomers will kind of lead the way, so to speak. So that's helpful. But then, of course, when we just go down the path here, Gen X, that's the next cohort. They're old enough now to think about retirement. Yeah, the oldest Gen Xer is in their early 60s, so retirement isn't far away. So you must adjust your plans. You must plan accordingly. But of course, Gen X is now the first cohort that will carry potentially in significant numbers a mortgage well into their retirement. So you have financial pressures there, but they still have a high home ownership percentage in their cohort. So they should ultimately be okay. And of course, Gen X is just before they inherit money. That's scale. So they
That'll
will
make
get
a
this
difference.
financial boost just before retirement, decade, 5 years before retirement, their own retirement. So that'll ease their finances. And then once you push the small Gen X into retirement, they only add a little bit of pressure onto the healthcare system because it's such a small generation. It gets much more crazy once the millennials born in the 80s and 90s hit their 80s, essentially 80s and 90s. And they do this in the 2070s. 2060s, 2070s. So that's still a while away, but you will never have seen any pressure like the millennials will put onto the healthcare system. So we better develop a model in the next 50 years to make sure we prepare for the millennials, or 40 years really, because this is going to be wild when they enter retirement and then aged care and so forth.
Yes, the common thread, though, is that most of them are still operating with the mental model that life's going to be, 15, 20 years shorter than the one they're actually going to live. So I think this is a great discussion we're having and opened my eyes in many ways. It also made me wonder, should we rethink education if people are going to keep working for 50 or 60 years in the future rather than 30 years?
Absolutely. I think by now it's become a very well-known concept that lifelong learning is the norm for many a job. It was always in certain professions like healthcare, doctors. We always understood we need to train up those folks because you kind of want the doctors to be up with the times in medical technology. So that made sense. So we established this in one profession. We'll establish this across the board because we are facing a society, an environment where the technology continues to improve at a fast pace. So we better do this. So I'm currently already advising young people against just condensing the formal education phase just to the early 20s. I'd say if you want to get a bachelor's straight after uni, straight after high school, but then work for a couple of years and only then consider in your late 20s, early 30s, whether you might want to do a master's degree, whether this can give you an edge up in the world. Maybe it doesn't, but always think about small micro upskilling. This can be in a formal sense. It can be a bit more informal. It can be the establishment of a disciplined reading habit throughout your life. Remember, a book per week ensures you read 1,000 books every 19 years. So that's rather helpful. Yeah, if you establish a habit like this, you keep this going on for 4 blocks of 19 years. You have 4,000 books smarter than just scrolling through TikTok. It's worth the effort.
Yes, definitely. I guess most people that I've been in contact with over the years haven't even kept their first job or profession. They've gone on and learned to be a teacher and realized they don't like that, or they've done another profession and changed along the way. So it's more likely over the future that people will have multiple different careers, and many of the jobs haven't even been created yet, have they?
Yeah, and that's always the challenge, is how do you prepare for something that isn't on your radar just yet? Yeah, and that's particularly, of course, I would say that's even more pressing the younger you are, is the idea of how are you preparing for something that you don't even know will exist. And that's where we draw conclusions about, well, what type of knowledge, what type of wisdom might be important. Yeah? And so my general argument remains that, broadly speaking, AI technology, you must be able to use it, and then that's fine. But ultimately, the technology will not set you apart. Being able to use AI, that won't make you a special worker. The thing that will set you apart as a worker is the non-technical stuff. It's the interpersonal. It's the soft skills that will set you apart. So you should double down on these kind of skills. And I think these soft skills, if you're not too much of a grumpy old bastard, they actually improve with life because you've seen more. You recognize patterns again. You've been fired a couple of times. You've fired people at times. You've seen this and that conflict before. So you are then able to act wiser around this situation through your just sheer wealth of experience. And yeah, so I think that's something that's worth it. So I think older workers become more valuable in the future, not just because we run out of workers, as we often discussed in this podcast, but also because the type of skills that we want from our workers are actually more favorable towards older wisdom, recognizing patterns, soft skills, the sheer intellectual computing power that, of course, peaks somewhere in your 20s. You don't have that as an oldie. Yeah, that actually declines with age. So this will not be your selling point, but wisdom is. And so I'd say you want to create systems in your workplace, in your organizations that tap into the wisdom of the aging population. Otherwise, you miss out on a big fat benefit.
Yes. Now, for somebody listening or watching who's in their, 40s, 50s, and now just recognizing, gee, I've got to plan differently. I'm going to live to 100. And maybe they've realized this for the first time today. What are a couple of important things they should be doing differently in terms of their financial, their investment strategy? You've already talked about how they've got to maintain their social network. But are there any other hints just to finish off today?
Yeah, so I'd say that the basic truisms is just first and foremost recognize that you might be living longer. Take this as a serious possibility. So don't just assume that you die at 80, assume that you might die at 100. And so then you think a bit more long term. So that means maybe you should, in terms of, what kind of super account should I choose? When should I switch from an aggressive investment strategy to the defensive strategy? Maybe you will need to become defensive a bit later in life. In terms
Yes,
of
you need
property.
a bigger asset base than you think you did.
Yeah, exactly. And so that just changes the equation. You also should probably really become serious about owning a property in old age. So that's important. For some people, this won't be possible. But if you can, that's absolutely important. And then, of course, you want to be absolutely certain about your health. That's the single best insurance in old age is just staying physically active, reading, remaining socially active. That has positive health impacts like crazy. So do all of the above, and your retirement can actually be wonderful. I'm always looking at old people that I well and truly admire, and where I go like, I want their retirement, I want their
Yes,
death. Jane Goodall last year at I think 92, 93, and she died while she was doing a speaking tour in America, and she died in good health in her sleep in her early 90s. I was like, this
lovely.
is the best death you could come up with. This is wonderful. I want that.
Well, Simon, I think this has been a fascinating discussion because it reminds us that demographics actually is about people's lives, how they live. And if we're going to live longer, we need to rethink more than just retirement, as we've already said. Rethink housing, careers, wealth creation, relationships, health, education, and community. And also, in my mind, as an advisor on wealth, it means you've got to plan more strategically as well. Now, if you've been listening to this and it's opened your eyes, and you know somebody who would also benefit from this information, why not pass this on to your friends? There's a share button on every podcast app or on YouTube. Just click it and send it to somebody, and give them a bit of a scare about how long they're going to live as well. Because a longer life is going to require different planning. It will require having a bigger asset base, multiple income streams. It also requires purpose, connection, flexibility. So it's not really how long you're going to live. Let's make sure that we live better longer. And so don't wait till your 60s or 70s to think about it. I guess if you're younger than that, think about it now. Think about the type of life you'd like to live, the type of work you want to do, the relationships you want to nurture, the financial base you're going to need to give you the choices. Because if you get it right, living longer is going to be a great opportunity, something that our forefathers would never have imagined, would they, Simon?
No, I think 100 years of age seems biblical if you talk to somebody from 100 years ago. And yeah, thanks to technology, you might be part of of this club.
Catch up with you next week, Simon. I look forward to having another chat.
I'll see you next week.
This Demographics Decoded podcast has been brought to you by Metropole Property Strategists. We provide a complete range of services to help our clients safely create intergenerational wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you're looking to buy an investment property or your next home, why not have a discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists? Just go to metropole.com.au and explore your options. You'll find we're much more than just another buyer's agent. We provide a complete range of services, including property advisory, wealth advisory, home buying, buyer's agency, property management, renovations, and development management services. The team at Metropole will help you with frameworks that I've fine-tuned over 5 decades, and we've been helping clients with for well over 25 years. We're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but still small enough to care. In between these Demographics Decoded shows, you can follow me on social media, and I suggest you also follow Simon Kuestenmacher. You'll find him regularly posting on all social media platforms. And thanks for spending the last little while with Simon and me. I hope you got some benefit from the show. And if you did, and you know somebody who may also benefit, please tell them about Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you're definitely going to be doing us a favour, helping us in our quest to make as many people as possible aware of the demographic changes that are going to be shaping their future. And of course, if you don't currently subscribe, we'd love you to. And of course, any of the information that we've been sharing with you is general information because we don't know your specific circumstances.